Welcome back. Our, our next session is a workshop we've titled The Fine Print on Reading the Author-Publisher Contract. And we are going to learn about multiple types of contracts that you can expect to sign as a publisher or as an author. For this session, we have Karthika Vicky, who is a publisher at Westland Publications and who has previously worked with Penguin Books India and HarperCollins India. Presently at Westland, she's led the launch of a new imprint called Context that publishes both fiction and non-fiction. And we have Vinuta Malia, who is editor, publishing consultant and journalist. She's currently an assistant features editor with a newspaper in Pune, and she's also an advisor to the conference. Thank you.
Hello. Oh, okay, that was loud. I was just telling Vinuta that they're both smiling very happily in those photographs. But the one thing that's guaranteed to switch that smile off is when a contract arrives in your email, and it's red marked, and the hundreds of questions have been asked by lawyers, and you really, that's just like not the best part of the job. But it's also become more and more complicated because more and more authors are asking the right questions. They want to know more. They want to know what they're giving away when they sign that document that publishers hand them. And it's also true that a lot of authors are now savvy enough to have lawyer friends who will advise them and who will then send very detailed legal notes back. The problem is that very often these lawyers are either lawyers who deal with criminal cases or with completely unrelated stuff, and therefore think that the stakes in publishing are so high that they have to protect their client in all sorts of ways which are completely irrelevant to book publishing. I'm not saying that when the scale is that much more, these things will become important, but at the scale at which we are at now, a lot of this seems irrelevant or too nitpicky and really so complicated that you wish you didn't have to deal with it. The significant shift that has happened in multinationals, at least in the companies that I've worked with, is that earlier editors used to do a lot of the contract work. As in, if I was working with an author, I would send them the template, they would send me back their comments, I would go through that, and as a publisher I would often just say, oh yeah, that's fine, this is fine, we can live with this. You know, they were minor things, or so I thought. And we would just say, okay, fine, you want to take back right of first refusal, no problem. You want to do restrict rights to territory, language, no problem. And there'd be other small things, I want 15 copies free instead of 10. And you'd take a look at that and you'd say, okay, we can afford that. The only things you didn't mess with were things like grant of rights, in terms of the phrasing and what it actually said in legal correct speak, and the indemnity clause, which was crucial and at the heart of every contract. So I'll come to the details of that. But now the shift that I'm talking about is that there are more legal people involved. Most of the publishing houses have a legal team or an external counsel or professional legal help. Partly because these international publishing houses are aligned with publishers internationally and they use the same template across. So I, for instance, work at Westland, which is an Amazon company, and Amazon has a template that they would like to use around the world. As someone who came in new to that world, though I was from multinational publishing, which was more traditional, to me it seemed like a really problematic thing that I cannot negotiate every clause with an author. If the author says, I want to rephrase this, I want to write this word here and that word there, to me it made no material difference. And I would say, why not? It makes no sense, the man is happier, the woman is happier, and that's great. But then I learned to understand the point of view of scalability, which is that when you handle books, say you're doing a few hundred books a year, or a few thousand books a year, whatever your scale is, and you're doing that many contracts and that many addendums to contracts and that many sub-licensing agreements, the more you fiddle with things, the more you change things which may not seem major, but which alter something in that language or in that clause, it's very difficult to administer it. which is when I learned to appreciate the fact that there are people who make contracts, especially at a stage when editors really want to acquire a book. We're ready to give this anything to that author because we want that book. So we were like, this is immaterial, right? The contract is only about advance and royalties and terms of territory. Everything else can be worked on. Then you realize that the people who administer the contract have a completely different problem. They have to make sure that we abide by that contract. The editor will make the contract and move on. The administrators of that contract, whether they are legal people or whether they are management, etc., or finance, because they have to handle the handing out of royalties and payments, those guys have to make sure that every clause in that contract is abided by. They can be taken to court anytime for any small violation. And companies like ours have multiple audits happening all the time, and auditors ask a million questions. One of the questions that they always ask is, what kind of business is this? Like, I'm thinking about people like Ernst & Young, right, who audit companies across the world, and then they, of all kinds of industries, they don't understand publishing. They come and say, but you've given them money up front, you've paid them this money, they're going to give you the manuscript in like 2 years, then you're going to publish it, and you've already given them the advance, and then what if it doesn't come back? How are you going to account for the unsolds? Like, they don't think it's sound financial business sense to do it the way we do, so they ask 100,000 questions about why everything is the way it is. So for those reasons, I learned to also respect the fact that it's not just about making contracts which are happiness inducing for author and editor. They are to make sure that forever, you may leave this company and leave and go away somewhere, but the system has to automatically make sure that those clauses are abided by. And I cannot stress that enough. The fact that the confusions and the cracks that everything falls through when people leave in an organization. And somebody else who comes by is assuming that these are all in order, there's template. Nobody remembers that in that one contract, the clause said that any sub-licensing will have author approval, right? Now, that may also seem perfectly okay when you're signing a contract. If I ever license Malayalam rights to a book in English, I'm going to make sure that the author approves the Malayalam text. Absolutely reasonable. Except there may be 5 contracts which don't have it and one that does. There may be an author who says, well, I'm never going to read the Malayalam. I'm going to trust my publishers. I don't have the time for this. If you ever license it, your headache. Make sure it meets quality, and it will say something about quality check there, which says it's the publisher's responsibility to make sure everything is done. Now, how 10 years down the line when you license that book, is someone going to remember this and make sure it's met? If you don't, then you have a very angry author at the end of it. I know of lots of people who are now complaining that audio rights have been used by a publisher without permission. Now the thing is, 10 years ago, nobody thought of audio rights as serious business. They all had it in their subsidiary clauses. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. And then they had something which was a most interesting clause which said the publisher has mechanical reproduction rights, which includes everything known now and to be known forever, right? Something like that. Now, every publisher said, but we have rights to everything that is coming. So we also have audio rights. We also have ebook rights because that is new technology. The contract protects us. But it didn't actually, because a legal point of view would say you have to spell it out. Because this is new technology, the terms have to be renegotiated. You can't get away with just saying you have it. So publishers around the world, I'm talking about 5-6 years ago, or maybe a little bit more, we had to go back to every contract, revisit every one of them to go back to the author and say, according to this clause, we had rights, mechanical reproduction. We would like to specify that these are for ebook rights and these are the royalties we're going to give you. So the thing is that why I'm saying all this as a preamble is to say this document that we make is much to the chagrin of most people who don't want to deal with legalese, a really important document. Because one, it protects the author. Whatever rights they're giving to you are clearly spelled out, and unless the author knowingly gives you those rights, there's something not quite ethical about that exchange. You want to insist to your author that they read the contract. There are many people who would say to you, oh, I trust you. I'm sure it's fine. Has everyone else signed it? I'll sign it too. Do not do that. Tell them it doesn't matter if you don't understand every word. Please go away and actually just read it, because you must know what you're giving away to us. Because a year down the line, if that same author comes back and says, I didn't realize what I was doing, it just makes for a bad relationship, and they will go away and publish with someone else because they will feel that distrust even if you did not do anything to earn it, right? So please insist that they look at it, they read it. If they have friends who are lawyers, fine. Otherwise, become their lawyers. Speak for them. Get them into the office or wherever, sit down, go through the clauses with them and say, see, this is what it means. This is what it is in it for you as a writer, and this is what is in it for the publisher. And there will be conflicts in some clauses, which we'll look at, where you might feel that this is too much that you're giving away to the publisher, and the publisher might feel, but without this I cannot exercise the full extent of my business opportunities. And if, for instance, permission is a big sticking point, if I have to come back to you every time I have to reprint an edition, you're the author, you've given me the rights, and you say, okay, but like 3,000 copies, okay, no more. Then when I want to print like 5 copies more, I have to come back to you for permission. At which point you might say, you know what, I want more royalties, or I want something else. And then you're thinking, that's not fair. I put in everything to make this book happen. I'm the reason 3,000 copies sold, maybe. Now I have to renegotiate with you, or you hold this threat of going somewhere else. And this happens in the case of big writers. So they might have like a hugely best-selling book which would sell for like 7 years, 8 years, and then you realize in your contract, and I kid you not, this has happened to like one of the biggest writers in the world, the publisher did not realize that it was a term contract. And they just kept reprinting till somebody woke up at the other end of the world and said, I'm sorry, the contract says it ran out a year ago. And then they had to frantically renegotiate. So these things happen because you're moving away from the template without warning systems written into your whatever system it is. Not everyone has access to software that flags these delays or changes or whatever, so it's all manual. And not many of us have the ability to have legal teams in-house who will, keep Excel sheets with everything properly done. You're often like a 2-people office trying to publish. So my feeling is that despite all the difficulties, the best thing you can do is to have a contract that you do not fiddle with at all if you can help it. Keep the language the same, keep the terms negotiable to a certain extent, the primary things which we'll talk about, but don't just use language casually, because that will come back to bite you at some point. You don't know what's going to change about the world tomorrow, you don't know what the laws will say tomorrow, and you don't want to be sitting on a book that you have sold for like 15 years and really successfully suddenly go out of your hands because some clause was, a grey area which could be reused. So there's lots of things to be really careful about, but it's not really intimidating. It's just that the language can be a bit off-putting when you're reading it from the sense of just common sense. It sounds like a lot of it is really behind time. It sounds archaic. But as I said, it's important.
You, Katka, before you go ahead, because of what you said, when you explain these contracts to your authors, do you go clause by clause? Because the clauses are still extremely legalese. Even if they read it, they may not understand exactly what they are.
Which is why I think it's important to explain. For instance, the first clause in most contracts I've seen is grant of rights. And it will say that the author gives the right to the publishers to publish, license, distribute, whatever, many terms will be in it, to the publisher for these many years, or as long as copyright law allows them to, or in so many languages and so many territories, but not excluding something else. All this will be spelled out in that first grant of rights. And I think that is the most important one where conversations happen. Like you might say, yeah, but why am I giving you world rights? Are you going to get my book into stores in the US? And then you have to say, no, I may not be able to get it in, but what are you going to do about it? Are you going to get it in? And they'll be like, no, maybe I won't, I don't know how to do this. Then you'll say, then leave them, because who knows? Maybe five copies will be ordered by somebody on a.com or whatever. And if you have the rights, you can at least send those 5 copies. If the author's traveling to, say, Edinburgh for a literary festival, and we don't have the UK rights as the publisher in India, technically, we shouldn't be sending copies to that festival. And these are things you don't think about when you're thinking of rights, because everyone's thinking about bookstores. But there are so many times when all you need is just a few copies, but where the law does not allow you to, because we say on those books for sale in the Indian subcontinent only, or for sale in India only. There's a little bit of thing on the back cover to protect us, and that protection I'll come to, because that's a very different protection that is from online piracy and distributors who love to store books and sell them online as though they are allowed to when they don't have the rights to. So a lot of publishers therefore put that thing. Now, if I'm an author going to, say, Edinburgh, as I said, who's carrying 10 copies with him, which says for sale in the Indian subcontinent only, they're forced to give those books away for free. You know, we might have sold 10 or 20 copies, he could have just been happy with that, but it won't happen. So those grant of rights, the possibilities, the problems, they're not written there. You have to really kind of talk them through to say this is why it may make sense to do this one. So not in legalese terms, but in regular conversational terms, we would go through main contract terms. So I just get up. I realized as I was just thinking about this last night that actually author-publisher agreements are just like one thing. We do a hell of a lot of contracts, and each one of them is important for a different part of the business maybe. For instance, this is a really small thing, right? How NDA, non-disclosure agreements. So like I was signing a writer on last year who's very well known and did not want it to be known that she was working on a book. So she said that I would have to sign an NDA, that nobody else will hear about this book. Now this is really difficult for it's very difficult to protect a writer from, word getting around, because so many people are involved in the signing on of a book. I remember this happening with, you're my generation at least, not them, but do you remember the fake IPL player? Do you remember someone like that? You do. There was a guy with an ID called fake IPL player, and nobody knew who he was, but he was writing the most brilliant coverage or blog, and he would predict what was going to happen, and he'd be like, and this is going to happen. Remember this? Yeah. So, and he then got in touch out of the blue and said, I want to write a book. And of course, we wanted to sign on this book, and it was great fun, and then he wrote a whole book about it. But we had to sign an NDA with him saying that nobody would know who he was, what his real name was. I knew it, and the person who signed the contracts knew it. But that kind of agreement is very rare. But as I was making this list, I realized there are so many documents we have to come up with. There are embargo contracts that are done, little NDAs again, where suppose you have a new Harry Potter coming out, then you would send copies maybe to certain select media people, maybe to some booksellers, and you would make them sign saying till midnight of that particular date, you cannot ever reveal anything, including the cover or whatever it is. So you have to sign even that. So those things are phrased and rephrased as things, come along, situations arise. There are things like publisher, distributor, retailer agreements, which are maybe signed off once a year, renewed, etc. But those are really detailed terms as well there. But right on top is the author-publisher agreement, which I suspect is what anyone would be interested in if you're either writing or publishing. And within that, the second thing that I have there, the publisher licensing agreement, is could be many things. It could be that we've published a book in India and we're licensing it to, say, Chicago University Press. So the agreement will not be with the author, it could be with the publisher here and the publisher there. So it would be almost like an author-publisher agreement. We are licensing the book to them, and it will have all the same terms, but there will be some standard glitches that come up. For instance, which laws govern that contract? If I'm signing a book with a writer in India, then I'm going to be clearly saying this is governed by the laws of India. Sometimes it will say the courts of Delhi or the courts of Chennai or whatever, wherever it's located. But these guys might come back and say this is governed by the laws of the US. And then there's usually a battle about this because our legal guys will say no, their legal guys will say no, and then somebody has to compromise. It's usually the person who needs it more who compromises. But I know, for instance, that Yale University Press, for instance, will always put their head down and say, no, we cannot do it without laws of England or whatever governing it. So then you have to take a call and say, okay, is this a deal breaker or not? And that is the other thing about the contract, that you negotiate and you negotiate every clause till you reach a point where you say, how badly do we want this deal And if it's a deal breaker, are you going to let this book go, or are you going to compromise on that clause? And that finally decides it. There will be a few things which most publishers will not allow, and that is where we look at the indemnity clause. But otherwise, there will always be a point where somebody blinks and says, I can't make this deal, so do what it takes, let's sign this on. There's a publisher licensee agreements. Now that is the audiobooks and ebooks thing that I was talking about earlier, which now almost every publisher has automatically got this in their contract. Every single physical book we publish is automatically and simultaneously published as an ebook. So we have that embedded in the contract, and we're not allowed to sign on a book without ebook rights now. I don't think any publisher whose management allows it, because it's like saying one half is valid and the other half is, you're not able to use it at all. So audio rights and so on you would give me, film rights, television, all of those are negotiable, but not ebooks. Film, anthology, adaptation, these things often fall into subsidiary rights, which are your second rights. There's the primary sale and primary royalties, and then there's the subsidiary ones. So those will fall into that. There you often have very detailed contracts coming into you from film agents, from film studios or whatever, and those guys are even worse. They're like so inflexible that, for instance, recently we got stuck in a contract where this is a book called The Tandoor Murder. This was by Maxwell Pereira, and it reconstructed that whole Tandoor Murder business. Now this person who wants to buy film rights said that anything, if something goes wrong, if there's a court case, if there's any violation of whatever, then the author is liable. And the author's lawyer said that the author is liable as long as it's an exact reconstruction or use of what is in the book. But we all know that when films are made and web series are made, they will recreate stuff, they will add characters, they will add situations, they will add emotion, which may not have been the right emotion indicated in the book. So how can you make the author liable for something that is extraneous to the book? But for the film guys, they were like, without that we won't sign, because you have to give us liability, you have to give us that guarantee. And the author's lawyer said, absolutely not, we cannot give you that. Now, commonsensically, it just seems like, obviously the author's people are in the right? But the deal fell through because those guys said, we will not take the risk. So it is a matter of saying, that was a lot of money also actually that they lost, because we lost because of that, not we, the author. But at the end of the day, you say a court case that might come up, or somebody filing a case, the cost would be even higher, if you are going to be liable for that. What if they show somebody else murdered the person or something, then the family takes you to court or anything. So at some point you have to draw the line and say, we will negotiate so far, but beyond that it's not safe, and so you let it go. So that is now becoming I think it'll iron out in a couple of years. At the moment there's so much hunger for content among these studios and new guys who've come up. They don't have enough scripts, they all want to sell to Netflix and Prime, and they're looking for books, and so they are willing to just buy, take options and hold on to them. So what happens is that also they will often buy options and do nothing with them. So they might buy option rights to a book, and then they say for 3 years it's ours, and then if it doesn't get done then we do it. I'll tell you a really interesting thing that happened with the Zoya Factor that is just releasing today, Anuja Chauhan's novel. So when she first wrote it and it got published about 10 years ago, Red Chillies bought the option and they paid good money for it. Red Chillies option ran out. They weren't making it. They said, oh, it's too expensive, cricket stadium, World Cup, all that big scale. I think Shah Rukh wasn't personally saw himself in it. Anyway, that didn't happen. Then they did, Saregama decided to buy it. And Saregama also paid money, good money. Then Saregama also ran out of option. Then Anil Kapoor's lot came on board. Sonam Kapoor, I think, really liked it. So then they acquired rights and they paid more money. So it's like one of those really rare books where it actually just sat and made money for film rights over the years, and then 10 years later it's a movie. So these things you can't tell. If signing a contract is no guarantee that everything will happen. You may need to renegotiate it 100 times over. But finally, the money, of course, is not in book selling. It's in this particular selling of rights, and what it then does for the book as a return gift. You get higher sales. So everyone's going out to try and do that, but be very careful when you sign a film contract. They're not the easiest people to deal with. There's a certain way in which authors and publishers deal with contracts, which is we're on that same wavelength in some ways. I don't mean to say that one is unethical and one is ethical, but I do mean to say that one is hardcore business and one is about many other things. So be really careful, read every word of that, or before you know it, something else is happening and you are not safe. Okay, those addendum to agreements are the other thing which keep happening, which is that suppose you do publish a book and then somebody decides that they want to keep rights because we haven't. So I'll tell you an example of Punachi, this novel we published last year, 2018 early, by Perumal Murugan. We published it in English, translated from Tamil. And then a Manipuri publisher got in touch with us a few months ago and said he really wants to publish this in Manipuri. And he said, I'm like a one-person outfit, I'm just going to translate it myself, I'm going to publish it myself, I might put 500 copies out, I can't pay you any money for this, because translation itself is going to take something from me. Now, as a publisher, you're giving away free content without any guarantee of what is going to happen to that book. You don't know the quality of translation, you don't know how ethical the selling is going to be or how many copies are actually going to go out. I'm not casting aspersions on the publisher. He was a really sweet guy, I think, and does this just out of passion. He knows that it's not like a big market. But the thing is, if you look at it completely rationally, you have no control over this market or know nothing about it. And you're not going to pay anything to the author. So you are actually telling the author, we're just giving away to some unknown quantity, some unknown stuff. Instead of that, we said, why don't we just revert the rights to that language to the publisher who first published the Tamil? And even if there's no money involved, there's no question of free handing out of rights. It can just be like a simple agreement between the author and them saying, yeah, okay, for 500 copies we're taking it, and there's no money exchanged or whatever. This could have been done by us as the publishers as well, but that's when legal teams kick in and they say, but how are you going to administer this contract? Are you going to check this? How do you know only 500 copies are going to be printed? You're going to take this person on trust and you're going to just believe this. Well, that's fine, but legally we don't think we can say this is all right. So it's a bit of a sleight of hand when you say, okay, fine, then we'll revert rights. But sometimes you take that call to make sure that the book actually happens and something is done rather than everyone sitting on it and saying, well, then we're not giving rights, we're just going to hold on to it. So at least part with things you don't want and part with things you can't use. So those addendums keep coming up where the publisher is not exercising a right. For instance, you have rights in the US but you're not selling in the US. Some other publisher comes along and talks to the author. We say, fine, go ahead, like, rights are yours, we'll revert them to you. So those addendums happen. This is something that this publisher photo agency agreement is also an interesting thing which has appeared in most of our lives recently, which is, when you see cover photographs, you see inside pictures in a book, etc. There are photographers to be chased down for this, there are photo agencies to be chased down. So mostly what a lot of publishers do is we have standing agreements with, say, Getty or Corbis. Well, Corbis is also now part of Getty, I think, but other photo agencies as well. Even, for instance, I think Reuters and so on have a package deal. So in a year, you can take maximum so many photographs for a much cheaper rate than if you were going to buy it once. So then you have to have fairly elaborate agreements in place with them so that violating a copyright on that can be really problematic. I remember once publishing a book, I forget what, Afghanistan or Pakistan, one of the political history books, where there was a photograph which was credited to Getty. The photographer wrote a fairly stern mail to us saying we violated copyright, etc. And we were like, but we took it off Getty. But it turned out that Getty's agreement with him for some reason had never got signed because he had gone AWOL on some assignment or something. and then we had to write and say we're really sorry, we did not have a clue that this was going to be a violation. But we were protected because we had an agreement with Getty which covered all such purchases for the year. So we were okay. But even one of those things, if someone gets really, cross, and if they're a very well-known photographer, you can be wiped out of all things you hope to earn with that book by that just one case. So these secondary things, so-called, from the publisher-author agreement, all feed into that one same thing, which is publishing that one book and making sure that all the aspects of publishing it are well and carefully thought through. Designer, illustrator agreements, for instance. I know that Tulika, for instance, was doing a lot of illustration content. We don't do that much, but where we do have an illustrator giving us content, who has the copyright? Okay, I've commissioned you to draw 20 illustrations for this book. I'm paying you a certain money, which I think we both agreed on. What happens when somebody else wants to publish that same book and use those same illustrations? Are you going to give the copyright? Are you going to charge them? Are you going to give them away free? And who gets to keep the money? Those things only come up later, because when you're publishing, you're focused on that one form, one format, that original publication edition. But then these things come up later. So it's always safer then to have a contract with your designer, it could be a simple contract. It simply says, you've taken the right to publish this, these illustrations now are yours for a one-time fee, and the copyright remains with the illustrator, which I think is very important to actually state, that the copyright is not with the publisher, it's with the illustrator, but the publisher has the right to use and reuse it within that same book or in publicity related to that book. But you should be very clear whether you're buying the rights to it to also use in other books, for instance. What if you've drawn, I don't know, a little monkey or something, and I have 3 books coming up with monkeys in them, and I decide to use this monkey from here to put into that monkey book. Is that all right? Because after all, I bought the rights to that illustration. I commissioned it. But that contract is there specifically to preempt misuse on either side, and to also clarify that yes, if I can use it, then it's written there that I can use it. So there is no dubiousness about the things we do. All of these things, I think, are basically there, one, to ensure that we are a more ethically practicing organization. We make sure that our paperwork is in place, that we respect the things that we put on that piece of paper, and do not say, well, it's just a piece of paper, let's just do what's right, or what we feel is right by sense in terms of the business. That's not enough. And 2, it's there to reassure the other partner, whoever it is, whether it's an artist or whether it's an author, that we are only taking the rights that we are stating here. Everything else that is not in the contract is not ours. So there will usually be a clause that says everything that is not written in here specifically belongs to the author or to whoever. So that there is no doubt later, as I said, those uninvented things don't come into the picture at all. Tomorrow, if we say everything that, all content produced can be beamed up to Mars or whatever, publishers shouldn't be able to say, oh, but we have the rights for that, because it wasn't invented then, but now it's ours. You can't say that anymore. Everything has to be written in. So to take that document seriously is what I meant. Even these things which don't fall into the purview of editorial usually at all ever, but again, I think these are becoming more and more sacrosanct, and people are using them a lot more. There's one slide I had on the next one. Can I just, because you see what I mean, right? That there's a whole variety of things beyond the author agreement, but primarily they all feed into that one thing, which is how to publish the book right. Okay, I thought we could go with questions. If you have any specific questions, we could just address those aspects, or I could quickly run you through these essentials. It's really boring, right, contracts? Do you really want to talk about them?
Nobody wanted to ask a question based on what she said so far.
If you heard, okay.
There must be some. Okay, the gentleman at the back, can we get a mic? Wait, nobody else with the mic.
Otherwise I can...
Yeah.
The point about illustrators that you made, so if a publisher approaches an illustrator and tells him, commissions some work and pays for it, doesn't the right the right of that using of that image, it should be transferred to the publisher because he's paying, right? So So it cannot be with the
Yeah.
illustrator.
No, I agree, but I also think that there are there are degrees of payment. Like, I might pay someone 30,000 rupees for a set of illustrations, which I'm going to use in a book. But tomorrow, if I'm going to, say, license that book to an animation company, and they're going to use those illustrations to actually create animation, which is obviously going to be at a different level of earning, I don't think it's fair for the illustrator to lose out. I think we should be saying to them that for the purpose of publishing this book and anything related to this book in this form, this is what we're paying you. But if additional revenue comes along, I would rather they got a share of it. So it would be good to write a percentage in and say, if, for instance, if you have a cover of a book in India, and then suppose a German publisher licenses that book, they love the cover, they want to use it, their standard money that they might spend on a cover will be very different, much higher than ours. So you could contractually just hold on to all that money, but it's not right. I would say then just at least transfer 60% or 50% or whatever you think is right to the illustrator.
My thing is that you uses the same image and somebody else comes along, another publisher, and the illustrator gives the same image to the other publisher. So my point of view was that
That they can't do because they've signed an exclusive with us, right? So that would clearly say that it's exclusive to this publisher. It's not limited by time or number of copies or anything.
It's like in marketing we have this single campaign usage and the perpetual rights.
Correct, yeah.
So when a model shoot for a particular campaign, so that can be either a single campaign usage or a perpetual rights.
Yeah.
If it's a perpetual rights,
Then you can use it for anything.
For entire.
Which more and more people will not even let us have. I think they're all limiting rights.
But then if it is exclusive, then do you also specify that it's exclusive to that particular publication that you're bringing out?
Yes.
Or do you then say you can use it across 3-4 books?
No, so that's what I'm saying. If we want to use that, so I tell you what, if suppose we have an image which is going to be part of a series. So as I use the example of the monkey, but suppose I was doing a series of history books, okay? And each history book would start with a similar frontispiece. Say it's always going to have a photograph of or a representation of the Indian map or something, but artistically done, created in some beautiful way, and every book in that series is going to start with that same image, then I should have written it into the contract that it will be used across multiple publications. Usually you think about it as only for one edition, one publishing form, so you write it in like that.
I just wanted to know, if you're not making the ebook yourself,
Yeah.
but you're working with like partners who are making the ebook and putting it onto their platforms, would it still be sort of written into your contract as
Yeah.
for digital adaptations, or like with a set percentage, or would it go into your subsidiary rights?
No, ebook rights, ebook royalties are primary royalties. We give a percentage of the cover price of the MRP.
Of the whatever,
MRP,
MRP.
Okay. Because the partnerships or collaborators we have are just like retailers, right? Like we sell to a distributor, we give copies to, somebody on a platform is also selling them. We have a primary relationship with
I
them.
think the confusion there was because a lot of bigger publishers have their own sort of digital teams who automatically with the adult list, they just convert it onto an ebook version of that same, and then the ebook and the physical copy goes on at the same time. But with us, for
No,
instance,
actually
we don't-
most companies do not sell themselves. They do not sell ebooks.
No, it's
on
not
their own.
just selling, it's also about creating and then not having it on the publisher's platform but having it on a third party.
Correct, yeah.
So it works like that.
It
for-
works exactly like that. Like I might have a book of mine selling from Trilogy. I have it selling from, say, Amazon or whatever, or Kindle as an ebook.
Oh.
And so that is a royalty-based agreement with the author. Whatever sells, they will get a percentage of the cover price. It's not a subsidiary right.
Is it like a flat rate or is it like per download or per user?
It's like like a physical book, for instance. If a book is priced at 500 rupees and a standard hardback royalty would be 10%, then 50 rupees of every copy sold will go to the author. Similarly, every ebook download will have a certain percentage, depending on the publisher, going to the author.
The publisher has an access to that now.
Yes, they will give us reports of sales, all of them. Just like a distributor gives reports of how much they've sold.
Just one more thing about the illustrations. It also depends on the kind of payment. If you're having a royalty share,
Yeah.
then there's no question of you owning it
Correct.
as long as a royalty. But there are times when you do what we call a one-time payment. So that means you're commissioning and buying the pictures off.
Yeah.
Then, in which case we keep the copyright, perhaps. I mean, and
Okay.
that for certain kinds of books. I mean, if it's a picture book, then we believe in a royalty share because
Yeah.
it is 50-50 thing.
Correct.
But if it is just a few pictures for a non-fiction book or something, we might just buy it off, and then the pictures do belong to us. So
I know.
There,
So
there are those distinctions.
Exactly. So like I said, it's either perpetuity, you can use it any which way, or you would limit it to that. But I would normally still give the copyright to
No,
the
sometimes the
illustrator.
copyright, we usually almost always give the copyright to the illustrator for picture books. If it is a commission for non-fiction books, it's not necessary to do so.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, I mean, there's nothing wrong in either thing. It's just that with the copyright, if you're making sure that the copyright is with the illustrator, that automatically makes sure of the fact that next time you publish that illustration, you will not forget to give credit to that illustrator. Because you
That happens anyway.
but that is then dependent on the individual or the publisher being good-hearted about it.
However-
But if they have the copyright, you have to do it.
However, there are publishers these days, picture book publishers, who never give copyright. They just buy it off, like Patan, for example, simply because of the multiple platforms they use, and they belong to Creative Commons, whatever.
Yeah, no, buying off is fine. Like you're buying the right to use the illustration.
So if
But
it's-
getting copyright is another thing.
They won't give copyright, is what I'm saying. They'll buy it off and they don't give copyright. Because
Right.
they don't believe in a copyright system.
Right.
That also happens.
Okay, we've had illustrators saying to us that we're very happy for you to use, but we would like to keep copyright because
think
at any time an image is reproduced in the media, for instance, along with a review and so on, it's another sort of imperative then for publicity and marketing people to keep in mind that they have to make sure that media house carries the credit. Otherwise, I mean, I think they're just like little compulsions that once you have the copyright, you have to live by. That's why we can hold on to it.
Mr. Vishwanath had a question.
Oh, yeah.
So we almost exclusively do picture books, and that's the only genre that we are in. So we have found it very necessary, and we have done a kind of a P&L calculation, and we find that to bring out one picture book, the in-house cost is close between 4.5 to 6.5 lakhs. Just the in-house cost, because it goes through that. It takes 9 months from the time that you get started to the time that the average book comes out, and so there is, you end up producing about 12 books a year at the max, and then you have lots of back and forth, and so there's a lot of investment in time from our side. We have found it necessary, in fact, to say that we would do it only if we own the rights, that we would not, that all this, because the jackpot about subsidiary rights and an animation film is something that happens once in maybe 50 books or so, and keeping that in mind, one can't get into a complex relationship. So it's more a question of upfront having an agreement that either we do picture books or we don't do picture books. So either you support the process and you see whether there's a fair compensation upfront.
What you're saying is that a royalty share doesn't work.
Royalty share doesn't work, and in fact we make it work in a slightly different way from a legal standpoint. We say that we pay you an extra in lieu of royalty. So which means that the fees that I pay you may be 50,000 rupees for the illustrations for the book, and then in lieu of royalty I may pay you another 25,000 or 50,000 or even a lakh of rupees.
Yeah.
But I'd like to kind of pretty much say that everything is
You
with
own
us,
all rights.
that 5 years later if there's something that happens, because at the end of the day the very viability of the enterprise, when you have just the reason why children's publishers don't last
Yeah.
is simply because it's constructed on very unviable
I agree.
parameters, and so it is at the end of the day it's a choice that the author makes, it's a choice that the illustrator makes, whether this is something that you want to work
Yeah.
with. But sometimes some people find it very unreasonable that this is the only terms on which we work. This is the recent development after we are done. Is it really, how much can you support publishing from other enterprises? Because that's what actually at the end of the day children's publishing somewhere or the other, either you invent yourself as an NGO and you have some grant somewhere supporting something else, which is again not a good thing for the industry itself, or you kind of ensure that the industry is independently, or rather that particular segment is independently at least break even, if not profitable, because I don't think that anybody is making money on picture books. I mean, there is some form or the other where from somewhere the support is coming. It's just that that support is not very visible externally.
Okay, that is a different conversation, I guess. But yeah, I'm not saying that there's one right way to do things, but I am saying that it's important that the paperwork, the agreements, whatever you do with the illustrator or designer or writer, clearly spell out what you're doing, so there are no ambiguities to be later disagreed about or dragged to court over. Just everything written in once and for all in that document makes everyone's life easier. Also, I do know that in perpetuity can sometimes come in for trouble if you actually go to court about it. So I think people tend to tread cautiously even there. Yeah.
So I once had a book which was a memoir, and the author was dead, with no really known family. Right? We didn't, we had no idea. Now the thing is, somebody wanted to make a film on it, and they approached us and said, can we sign a thing with you? Now it became complicated for us because I said, look, there's nobody to pay whatever you pay us. It's not ethical for me to make money on something and then not be able to pass it on to the author because the author's dead. Then there was another question that came up, which is that since these are memoirs, what about the other people who are mentioned in the book? Because they also will appear as characters in the movie. And so then do we need to take permission from them to have them in the movie? I said, look, I have no idea, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm not signing this contract with you. Because ethically it's just, I don't even know who to talk to and who to get permission from. But the larger question still remains. In other words, if it's an autobiography or a memoir or a biography of a person, and if a film or a stage adaptation or something like that is going to be made out of it, then what happens to the rights of the other people who feature in that representation? Do the filmmakers approach them to get individual okays for their life stories to feature in this, or what?
From what I know, no. Once you've acquired rights for a book that may deal with real people or fictional people or whatever, if that was that whole Maxwell Pereira business, because Tandoor Murder, there are people still out there, obviously, and myself is out there. So if the filmmaker represented them differently from the book, then how would that work out? But when we got the legal team to read the book itself, because it's from the point of view of someone who was part of the experience and who's not doing, there's no hearsay in it. It is either information in the public domain or it is personal interactions for which there is clear documentation available, then there is no need to go for secondary permissions. So if the character in the book, who's written it or whatever, has actually interviewed someone and has notes and evidence that they interviewed them, or if they have actually personally interacted with someone and they're clearly able to prove that there is no hearsay here, then it's legally clear, is my understanding.
There would also be...
Correct, that is something that's to be read at a different level. If it is defamation, is a different thing, But otherwise, no.
You would also be obtaining indemnities from the author.
That's what I was saying, that the indemnity is for the originality of the material and the sort of verifiability of the material. That is definitely there in the contract.
Shall we move back?
Can I just ask a small question?
Yeah.
No, just to ask you, I mean, it's a broader, theoretical, conceptual question. In all contracts, the contract is between party A and party B. In publishing contracts, this is something that's addled me from day one, from the day I entered publishing. All of us as publishers say we are protecting the rights of the author.
First us and then the author. We might as well
Yeah.
do this.
and it's always first us and then the author, right? Any contract. Even my contract, which I have actually simplified, made it a 2-page contract, which I explain, instead of sitting with the author and explaining to him or her in simple English, I've made the contract in simple English. Okay.
Good for you.
So despite that, I mean, because I'm not bound, I mean, I have the advantage or the privilege of being the publisher as well as the editor. And therefore, if anyone is taking, I'm not going away, meaning if Tulika,
Correct.
right, you get what I mean?
Yeah.
The question that you
It's not
posed.
systemic.
It's
Yeah.
not systemic.
Yeah.
Now, despite that, I find that in all such gatherings, we are talking more and more about, and is this something that strikes you, about how publishers can protect their own rights. You know, make it independent, I mean, you know, construct a fort whereby we will not be taken to court by so-and-so, so, etc., etc. We must understand that we are the more powerful players in this game.
Yeah.
We can afford to take an author to court, very few authors, except for these big bestseller authors that, you know, we always give as examples, can afford to even take you to court or even give you a call, because publishers just shout you down most often. So what is your thinking about this? I
You
mean,
know,
in your experience.
Yeah. So actually what the difference is that I think most of us, I definitely speak for myself knowing this well, when I say protect the publisher, I instinctively draw the author into that circle of protection. I'm saying if that contract is well written, carefully written and worded, it's not just about the fact that the publisher is protected by what the author is saying, okay, I've given you original material, all this is done, but I'm also saying if a third party, say defamation, say anything, any sort of violation, third party violation, etc. comes up, we would normally rope the author into the protection, right? The clause in our contract would say we have the right to defend and speak for the author against any violation or allegation of violation. So I think while it is important for us to be protected, and of course that is very much the principle, I also think we are automatically saying this person by himself or herself has very little power, especially when it comes to facing the judicial system, and we will be doing that as well. We will be speaking for them as well. I think this is to be done in good faith. It doesn't always happen. But I know that, for instance, there was a case where somebody dragged a writer of ours to court and said, they said Ram ate meat. And so this is a great sort of sentiment has been offended and rubbish like that. And we didn't tell the author to get a lawyer or do anything. We just like, we're dealing with this. You come with us because you have to stand in court as well. But we will do all that it requires to be done because you have told us that this work is fine and verifiable. So now that you have given us that guarantee, we are taking on the responsibility of speaking for you as well. So I'd like to think that that is why and how we've managed to keep our authors going without actually being dragged to court all the time. Because we do this well and it will stand up in court as well.
It's not always true with all
It's
publishers.
not always
we know
true.
that.
I know that. Which is why I said I'd like to think that's how we operate.
Fair
And
enough.
I do think there's a basic decency and a basic ethicality and a certain trust that publishing in India, and I'm sure elsewhere, still works with, which is not like other industries.
Individuals in publishing houses, but not necessarily when they're confronted as institutions, as houses.
True. Can I
It's
just hold on to my
my-
optimism and my, yeah.
Sure.
No, I know that it's difficult and I know
No,
that
no,
it's not-
I'm also speaking from a point of view of optimism because I know I've published many a book which has run into trouble with other larger publishing houses, and I recognize it as a privilege I have because my being open to risk is less than, you know, an employee or even
absolutely.
a top-notch person in a large publishing house. My visibility is less as well.
Yeah.
So I'm not out there, you know, exposing myself to
Yeah.
the risk of Mr. Batras of the world.
I agree.
And I've done many books under that cover, very aware
So
of that.
this is something I must tell you, that the thing I like about working at Amazon, we all know has many, I mean there are many ways to look at Amazon, let's say. But the reason I like working at Westler and Amazon, one of the things I've discovered, is that their legal team is really, really good. And what they look for is not how to prevent you from publishing stuff that can get you in trouble, but how to facilitate that publishing without getting into trouble. So I may do a book which says anything about the government or about, anyone, and they'll say, have you used the words carefully enough so that you say what you say, we're not stopping you from saying that, but will you just make sure that the words are correctly written so that you can't be dragged out for a careless use or for defamation or whatever. So I think we all kind of tend to balance those things out, and I've discovered that when you have a contract where the author says, this is original work, this is something I stand by, I've done my due diligence, notes, etc., then you can go to any extent to protect them. You can go to court. I mean, when we did Josie Joseph's book at HarperCollins, there was that whole Feast of Vultures, Jet took him to court, took us to court, all of that. But you had all your documentation in place, so you could go there and say everything is fine, it's kosher. Now let's do whatever due process is. So yeah, in good faith, yes, and hopefully institutions and individuals all come together for it. But so far, I think we're still in a state where there is that trust, and I'd like to hope it will last. Yeah.
One of the authors have used,
So, Mike, and that will be the last question.
one of the authors,
Is it on?
Yeah. He has used his own work, self-plagiarism, that is what. After 10 years, he has used one of these columns relevant for the new book. He thought that column is
Right.
useful for this.
Yeah.
One of the reader calls me, why should I read again and again one or two column, chapters
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that they can sue us or the author or what? He is the reader.
That's not a legal issue.
Okay.
That is a matter of, I don't know, some sensibility, that's the word. I know a lot of writers who do this, who quote themselves a lot, but usually they tend to put it in the references and say it's from a previous article or whatever. Have you read Manu Joseph's new novel? You will recognize non-fiction from his columns in it. But if you are a reader who reads across, but that's not a legal issue. It's his own writing, it's his copyright. He's chosen to use the same material. So I guess it's all right.
Nothing called self-plagiarism. I just want to correct it. There's plagiarism. And there's...
There is hang on. There is one case I know which might have been called self-plagiarism, I guess. Not knowingly, I think. But if you have written material which has been published in one place, and in this case, it was to you that it came as part of a book, right? But what if that same material used in a column had gone into another book also, which is published by someone else?
Farid Zakaria was speaking.
There were a couple of instances I can think of like that, where the person said, but it's my copyright, I published it in this place, I used it here and I used it here with two different publishers. But that, I think, can be problematic.
Yeah, but it's still not self-plagiarism
No.
because you're not stealing
Yeah.
it from anything
Yeah.
else.
But you're probably violating one publisher's rights, the contract you signed with them, by giving it to this other person.
Because it's not original.
No, because your contract also says that it makes you give an undertaking, I think clause 2 or 3 or somewhere, which says competition. It says that you have not used this material substantially in another competitive work. So there again, sometimes there is a problem because suppose you've written columns and suppose you will continue to write a book of columns, will appear once in a while, etc. And that then can be seen as a conflict. So sometimes there will be writers who will say, but you need to limit that and to say that this cannot be published, nothing can be published of this work for the next 6 months after publishing or something, yeah. Some limitation has to be there. But there is a competition clause. So these are the really quick essentials that in any contract I think we will tend to look at. One is the rights holder. You automatically assume that the writer is the rights holder, but that's not true. There could be someone else, like you said, the author is no longer around, then it could be a legal heir. It could also be, as happened in a recent case, where the author name is a pseudonym and the actual writers are actually two writers who've come together. You would probably know Kalpesh Ratna's name. So the two of them write together as Kalpesh Ratna. So you would have the rights holder as the two actual legal entities who will sign the contract, but the author name might go as something else entirely. So you need to specify that and work a clause in if required for that. The work itself, you've got to identify the work. Is it a work of non-fiction? Is it a work of fiction? Is it an anthology? Is it an illustrated book? How many words does it have, or how many images does it have? We don't normally put format. We don't normally say so many inches, so many whatever. Those things are not part of the contract. But if you sign a book with, say, Raghu Rai, Raghu Rai will put every little inch down in that, because he's so clear that this is the only way I want this book to be published. So then you will define those terms. Or if you were doing a book with Prabhupada Das Gupta, he might want like a, I mean, he's not around anymore, I know, but what I mean is someone like that who's really clear and knows exactly what they want. Then they will help you redefine that work and expand the definition. Otherwise, you're just putting the basic things there. But remember, you must put those basic things. If you think it's not important to put fiction or non-fiction there, for instance, how does it matter, right? You may have a title which can be worked later, it's okay. But what happens is, you may sign this contract today and say submission date a year from now, that person might come back and you paid a certain amount of money, say. Suppose you paid 2 lakh rupees as advance because you're looking at a biography of Sachin Tendulkar. You're not going to get it for 2 lakhs, but anyway, 2 crores, whatever. What if that person comes back to you a year later and says, you said I have to give you a manuscript of so many words. There's no title yet. It says nothing about what kind of book it is. Here is a book of poetry, 500 pages. What are you going to do? Because your legal contract does not say it has to be such biography of Sachin Tendulkar. So you must make sure that the work is spelled out as in at least the basic terms, so that, I mean, no author is going to come back and do this to you. All I'm trying to say is strange things happen, so protect. Prior editions. This is an interesting one because there are books that get published or self-published and then come back. Okay, so you know this movie Razi that came out. There was a book, right? Being Sehmat, I think it was called. Calling Sehmat, yeah. So that was published earlier, then the movie comes out, the book has a new life. Now, if you were signing a contract and if you wrote in it, first published by or original edition or whatever those words are, it's dangerous because there is an existing edition which has been selling for a while and there's information in the public domain about it. You cannot call yourself the original publisher of that work. So always check to see if there's a prior edition and then mention that there was or continues to be, and you are now taking rights for this new work. So there's no competition that happened earlier. Rights holders address, that's an obvious one. And formats. Some of it is here, hardback, paperback, ebook. From our perspective, these are the 3 rights that you must always take. A writer may say to you, you're originating in paperback, why do you want my hardback rights? Which seems perfectly reasonable, except if tomorrow that book becomes a really big hit and 10 years down the line you want to do this special classic hardback edition priced at $9.99, then you look at the contract and you say, oh shucks, I don't have the hardback rights. And some other publisher might just come along and say, why don't I give you some more money and do that. So keep the rights if there is no particular reason for the author to have them. If the author says right at the beginning, well, you're not going to use those, I know someone who will do the hardback, then talk about it. But otherwise, it is better to keep the basic 3 formats with you. Term. Usually, most contracts would say for the legal term of copyright, which is actually very, very long, right? For 60 years after the person dies and all of that. So there will be a lot of writers and agents who will say, no, 10 years, 7 years, 5 years. I think publishing, I mean, like 2 or 3 years makes no sense. By the time you get going, by the time the book actually makes a dent, gets a new life, it could be like a couple of years. You don't want to give it up at that stage. So I would say at least negotiate for 7 years minimum and then see how it goes. But usually the standard term you would offer is legal term of copyright. Territory, spell it out, Indian subcontinent. If you're writing Indian subcontinent, then please spell out the countries in the Indian subcontinent. Do not just assume that everybody has the same definition. Is the Maldives part of the subcontinent? Do you know that? Do you put Maldives? If I say I have rights to the Indian subcontinent, Would Maldives be part of it? It shouldn't, but the point is apparently that a lot of books transit through Maldives. So if you don't have rights there, then there's a problem.
But it is not part of
It is not part of the subcontinent. So you have to write in exactly which territories you are referring to, and then if you're going to add one territory which is like not really geographically defined as that, write it in, because that could be a problem.
But if it's transiting, how is it like?
Because there might be some copies kept there. I don't know what it is, but I think they just protect to make sure that there's no violation at any level. If you're doing the world, South Asia, whatever, these are very loose terms. Like there is no legal entity called South Asia, right? At least I don't know if there is. So which means that if you're going to write South Asia, then please spell out broadly which countries you are going to write about. Because the US has a habit of making contracts which says everything is like open market beyond their own shores. So if you don't spell out exclusivity in your contract and say, but I have Thailand or I have Singapore, if someone's looking at both the contracts next to each other, they'll say, well, the US has open market, and in their definition of open market, all these are open market. Left to themselves, India would also be open market. So you must just like be really clear, especially nowadays because everything is selling globally across platforms. It's a really small thing, but you might find, for instance, The White Tiger. You remember how it like won the Booker, it became a really big book. And in India, the ebook still does not exist because India did not keep the ebook rights at that time. And I'm sure they would have made a lot of money with ebooks because the book did so well. But at that stage, it was just like, oh, but it's owned by the UK or the US or someone. And we never bought into it at that time. So these things may not matter at the time of acquisition, but if something really works, then you will miss out on the revenue. Languages, again, if you're writing Indian languages, there's no need to spell out every single language. You would just say Indian languages. But if there are any specifics beyond that, like you're saying, I also want German, Italian, French, or whatever, spell that out. Otherwise, it's okay, right? Yeah, okay. Otherwise, just say English language, or English, Marathi, Hindi, or whatever your specific things are. Advance, which most, I suppose, publishers pay something or the other. So put that in and negotiate that right up front. And please remember, when you negotiate a contract with an author, please spell it out for them that an advance is against royalties. They just don't get this if they're first-time writers in particular. They assume that this is like some money you're giving up front and then the royalties will come on top of that. So we recently signed on a cricketer for his autobiography, and it was long, protracted negotiations. 1 year it took to actually sign on the dotted line. And then I had a panic call from his agent, like a couple of weeks ago saying, hey listen, is this how publishing works? Like, so this money that you gave us is now you're not going to see anything till, it actually earns out. And I said, yeah, it's written very clearly in the contract. He said, well, I don't think he understood it. He's now saying, but that's not fair. That's not how that's not how film works. That's not how other things work. And then so I was like, okay, because you understand, I'm going to explain this to you properly again. And please tell him it's written in. His own lawyers have signed on it. So it's fine. We didn't have a problem with it. But the thing is, it hits them much later sometimes. So it's much better to say to them upfront and say, this is what it is. It is advance against royalties. The pay. Now, why the pay is important to spell out is that the pay may be someone else. Just as there's an author name and a rights holder's name and they may be different, I may be the author or the rights holder, I may want to give the money to someone else. I don't know, maybe there are benami reasons to do this, but there could be perfectly legitimate reasons to do it. I want to give to my son or my daughter or my wife or my husband. Kuch bhi ho sakta hai. Or just, okay, this is the other thing that happens, where you have a company that wants to sign on. So maybe an individual who has an organization, like when we signed with Harsh Mandar, for instance, he has a trust that the money should go to. So your author name may be different, but your pay may be someone else who's given all the money. The effective date and the delivery date. Do you know what the difference is between these two in a contract? The effective date is when the contract comes into play or is effective. So it could be the day it's actually signed off on. But if the money that you promise them as an advance on signature, so you might write out an advance in multiple ways. You might say, I'll pay 1/3 on signature, I'll pay 1/3 on delivery of manuscript, and 1/3 on publication of the work. Suppose you haven't paid for whatever reason that first amount, it hasn't reached them, and many months have gone by and you maybe even published the book. There is a reason to worry if they come back and say, but that wasn't a valid contract. The contract actually becomes effective when you make the payment that's been promised to them. Otherwise, it can be tricky.
What about publishing contracts that don't start in advance, academic publishing?
That's fine, yeah. Primary sales. So the question we were asking really earlier about royalties, there's a hardback royalties which you must write in clearly, paperback royalties, ebook royalties. These three are normally a percentage of the cover price. The high discount sales, this is another thing that I don't know how simplified your contract is into, but this clause is something that we've discovered makes a lot of sense to us. Because there's so many ways in which you give away high discounts. Like sometimes, for whatever, there's a special sale across many stores in crossword sale decide to do and they want a special discount. You might end up giving them, I don't know, 55% or something. And then you find that you have to still give royalty on cover price to the author. You are so jacked because as it is, there are no margins.
I'm jacked already.
So you just lose money. Forget making break even, you're just losing money on those
Despite
days.
that, authors are not happy.
I know. But then you have to have some kind of protection in there because otherwise your high discount sales. Now, there's one thing though, please be fair to the author. Do not write in a high discount clause, which is your standard discount to the trade. Okay, that is not right. Because if you write in something like 50% is high discount clause, you'll find that a lot of publishers end up selling most of their stock at 50%, which means that author is only going to see royalties on net receipt and smaller percentage than they deserve to. So that is something that agents have caught on to, but I'm not sure writers know. So, I mean, we owe it to them to make sure that high discount clause is written in properly. Export sales, another area of concern because you can't just say cover price. If you're selling it to Pakistan, for instance, copies will go there at a different discount, plus they will put a different retail price on it. And then if you end up giving them royalty on your cover price in India, then again you end up losing money, not making anything at all. So in those cases, in export, you would normally put net receipt. You will pay royalty on what you get rather than on what is on the cover price. It's usually very little money. It's not as though it's a core of the business for most of us, but it's still one more thing because the margins are really small, right? We all know that. So all of these little things eventually end up making your P&L look really sad if all you've done is give away a high discount, export, and then paid full royalty on everything on price. This is the other big subsidiary rights thing, which you must make clear the terms and the payment. Are you giving the author approval on all of this? Are you making sure that you have the right to give it away at all? For instance, we don't take film rights. We don't take film rights only because traditionally publishers have kept 10% of revenue from film rights. 90% is written to the author. Now for that 10% you get from the deal, you spend, I don't know how many hours of work dealing with contracts, negotiating, figuring it out with people. It just sometimes doesn't seem worth it at all. You are happy that film rights have happened and you will do everything to facilitate it informally, send copies to whoever, talk to whoever, but it turns out that there's very little revenue benefit if you keep those rights. So publishers often say, we will facilitate but not own the rights, and they prefer to leave it with the publisher, with the author. Audio, again, Audible is making a lot of audiobooks. You can keep the rights or keep them with the author, they'll reach out directly. I don't think at the moment these are big things in India, but I do know that in the UK, for instance, over the last few years, every single book that some of the publishers do, like we do ebooks simultaneously, they're doing audiobooks simultaneously. Because they say that market is growing, and now they're saying like 50% of their books are read audio rather than read physically, which is a huge number. Now, if that's what is going to happen, then you want to keep the audio rights and earn some money from it also. Then there's of course film, television, web series, anthology. Somebody might be doing an anthology. Like recently we licensed a story to Aleph, which was from Punachi. They were doing a book called On Animals, sort of writing on animals by various writers. So then they would write in and they'd say, we want this particular chapter, then you do a short contract with them. But you need that also done because you're actually transferring the writer's work to another publisher, and you need to do that carefully to make sure that that can't be used across other works by that publisher or by anyone else, etc. So it's not so much the money, but to make sure that the contracts are clearly written in. And adaptation, oh, that's a typo. Okay, that's adaptations. That is a tricky thing again. What kind of adaptations? Someone might want to make an animation version of something, but somebody else might want to make a game out of it. So now gaming rights are written in separately, and most publishers will not keep the gaming rights, they leave them with the author. Interactive editions, that's the other problematic thing. What is an interactive edition? We don't really know, right? Some brilliant entrepreneur might come along and take some property of yours and make it a great interactive format. At which point, who has the rights? Do we have the rights, or does the author have the rights to give it away? It's best to write all that in now because you can see that the technology is doing all this. It's probably best to leave them in your contract only because it's such a loose term that tomorrow if there's an ebook within which there are hyperlinks embedded or an audio embedded or something like that happens, then can that be defined as an interactive book which you are interacting with or answering questions of, or just like the multiple formats that are possible there. If you don't have them, then that text, which is really the crucial part of that interactive text and which you have rights to, is going away out of your control, out of the author's control as well. So usually one tries to write in interactive editions also into the contract. Not, I mean, the sharing of money is different, but just to spell it out and say this too is a possible use of content. So I think that there's a lot of gray areas in many of these things which one has to watch for, but it's best to get one standard template done from a copyright lawyer who says, okay, at this point in time, these are the formats to at least prepare for, even if they're not being exercised just now.
We have about 10 minutes if anybody has additional questions based on this slide. Any other hand? I just want to get a sense of how many people want to ask a question there. 3? Okay.
4, right in the back there.
Okay. Yeah, Dr. Shah.
So, if any tech startup wants to do an audio version, the audio version of the book, the rights is not with the publisher and the author is passed away. It's not.
Yeah.
But so the rights is with the publisher, but it's in the contract, the audio is not clearly spelled.
Yeah.
So in that case, how does it?
Whoever is the legal heir to it. I mean, the assumption is anything.
But the author is not given, or the audio right is not given to the publisher. It's
exactly.
not
So
clear.
it's still with the author, which means that if the author is no longer around, then whoever is the legal heir to that copyright will have that also. So if, I mean, it could be anyone, whoever they've given their rights to.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how are merchandise rights usually handled?
Merchandising rights are written into the contract as a subsidiary right, but very often authors or agents will suggest that it not be with the publisher. I know that in children's publishing particularly, I would like to keep merchandising rights because, hey, that little monkey might become like one big thing. Then it'd be nice to have some toys that you can make out of it and do something with. But it's flexible. I mean, authors may say, no, I want to retain them for future use. It's not a vital right. In a contract, as far as book publishers are concerned, I think, as long as hardback, paperback, ebook rights are written in, everything else is flexible and negotiable. No, we don't make audio compulsory at all. Because, as I said, the numbers are really small. It has hardly grown the market. And we're not in any position to tell the author that we're going to do a great job with this. Whereas we know we'll do whatever's required for hardback, paperback, ebook, and we should keep those. But the others, we don't have a guarantee of doing right either.
Yeah. I just wanted to give you two my experiences. That is why, I wanted to tell that why this contract and agreements are two essentials. Actually, I was heading ETV channel, and you know that, so we have the rights for Big Boss and all that. So in Big Boss Kannada, because I am from Karnataka and I was overseeing it. Actually, you know that we carry the songs in all the places to wake them up, the contestants, and to all dances and all that. So soon after the Big Boss ended one season, we got a notice from the local audio maker. So he said, so he sued us for 5 crores because he told that we have used all his songs. And he is right, but we were not knowing. So we carried it umpteen number of times, and it was 5 crores he was asking for from us. And many negotiations happened, and at the end, so we settled for 2 crores. This is one thing. And in ETV Urdu, another funnier thing happened. So Anchor was an interactive program, and she was on a phono thing, and she asked somebody who was talking from other side to sing a song. She sang that. Immediately we got a notice from T-Series company, telling that, so the one who was on the call on the other side, so she used our tune. And yes, that is a real case. So she has lifted the tune. And again we settled it, so around 50,000, something like that. And these are the two incidents which has made. And at the same time, even whatever you told, so actually I am an author, and I have agreed for 1,000 copies, and in over 2 years I only has bought around 2,000 copies, and the publisher is telling that no copies are sold, still 1,000 is in stock. So this is how the things are running. Okay, so is there any method to know that how?
You need to sue them for 2 crore. Go.
No, I am ready to do that, but so Kannada industry, everybody is doing the same thing. So I don't know about other language industry, but in Kannada industry, almost all the publishers, so 60% of them, so they tell some copies, agreement is for some copies, and it will be some other number.
Print more than they commit.
Yeah.
True. Sorry, Ahalya had a question, Hema, I'll have to take that first.
2 questions. One is that when books that are e-books are available on Kindle Unlimited for free, is that counted as a sale for the author? I mean, in terms of royalty? And secondly, books like say Harry Potter, for example. Now, as a retailer, if I want to have a reading of a book, whether it's Harry Potter or if it's any other, let's say, high property book, for example, a Gruffalo by Julia Donaldson or whatever, are there right violations when you're doing that, if you're charging money for the event? I also remember when we were doing, so July 31st is a big day, Harry Potter and all of that, but then you can't, as a retailer, are you advertising the book for sale when you're holding an event, or are you violating merchandising rights?
Are you selling products apart from the book?
No, only the book. But Harry Potter is across Bloomsbury and Simon and Schuster, and it's got all those other movie-related books, etc. as well. So we just shy away from everything Harry Potter related because you're not really sure if you can do these things without permission, or do you have to write to?
As far as I know, if it's related to books which are legitimately on sale in that territory, you can do events which promote the book without any violation. If you were selling things which are not in territory, are not supposed to be sold in that territory, that's a different matter. As to commercial use, now I know that events can be ticketed. If there is a reading of from Harry Potter, for instance, which may be happening at a book club, and people are told that they must pay a cover charge for dinner while this is happening, I don't think that would be a violation. I don't think you would. I'm not 100% sure about this because it's outside of my purview. But it's a curious question. I must find out.
I don't think so.
I don't think
It won't be a violation.
Yeah.
Because unless you're profiting directly from the book in other ways, if that can be established, then there will be a legal
if
case.
you're commercially screening a movie without permission, then there is a problem. But if you're screening it at home, there's no problem, obviously. So there must be some related thing there where if you're not commercially exploiting the work of the author to make money for yourself, but you are promoting the book or other things that actually go back to the author, then I presume it's all right.
But then Harry
this
Potter,
is not, I don't know for sure.
But then Harry Potter had also sued Pandal in Calcutta during for using a Harry Potter theme. So
Warner Brothers would have done that.
Yeah.
Correct.
Under
So that is tricky. I don't know the answer properly.
So does that also work, say, if a magazine or a blog or a bookseller puts out an email to customers saying, this book is available, okay,
No,
and
that's fine.
puts an excerpt, that's incorrect,
That's also
right?
fine.
Oh, an excerpt is fine.
Excerpt is fine provided you've got permission from the publishers. That's
Yeah.
absolutely fine. And I think broadly we all agree to some sort of fair use, though it's not written into the contract,
Right.
that says a few words, a few
Right.
paragraphs, it's okay, it's only
Right.
publicity.
I'm often asked also within the newspaper business itself, many people are not familiar with copyright, for instance. So when we have to run book covers, my editor always, like in the initial years, like, can we publish this without permission? I'm like, it's the book, we are writing about the book, the cover has to be shown, and
What they don't usually respect is that when they extract a work, they should definitely be giving credit,
Absolutely.
permission. They say just by saying that this is published by XYZ without taking permission, they think it's all right. That's a continuous battle. Or, yes, usually it'll be the US edition of the India book. It's really tough. Thankfully, most of this is now online. You can ask for corrections later.
Actually, in television, it is 14 seconds are free, and from 15 seconds,
You have to pay. Right.
And that is why we see that the same visuals repeating.
Right.
14 seconds is free. So
Multiple use happens.
use it.
But this fair use thing is very interesting in the context of our of book publishing also. Lawyers themselves don't agree on this, that what is fair use? If I want to quote from Dalrymple's new book in something I'm publishing tomorrow, then how much of it can I quote without actually paying for it or getting formal permission for it? A lot of people would say 100 words, 200 words is perfectly fine, just make sure the credit is there. But there's nothing that says this is all right. There is nothing in the law that says this is fair use and this much is not fair use. So you're really taking a bit of a gamble when you do things which are in that space.
Indian copyright law, when it was amended,
Yeah.
should have insisted on
This is not part of it, yeah.
US copyright law is very clear.
Yeah, how much is fair use, correct. We don't have that. So that's really tricky because what happens is also with the way, the kind of timelines we all work with. If you write to, say, a publisher, HarperCollins in the US and say, I want to use one paragraph, they'll send you an automated mail back saying, okay, we'll come back to you in 3 months. In our kind of lives, 3 months is like next books have come out by then. So you can't wait, so then we tend to publish. So it's something to be aware of, that if you can, write that mail like a year before and try and get formal publishing.
Hema?
This is about the term. Say, when your contract expires. So say you've signed on for 5 years. So after 5 years, can you renegotiate your royalties and
As an
film
author,
rights
you mean,
and-
with the
as an
publisher?
author?
Yes, absolutely.
So you
You
don't
can.
have to agree to the earlier agreement.
No, the Zoya Factor was published by HarperCollins, is now a Westland book because the term of contract had run out, and she renegotiated with another publisher and got out.
Okay, and simultaneously with say web series, supposing the negotiations are on and your term expires, so you can for the book.
Yeah.
So you can renegotiate as an author with someone
Yes,
else.
yes. If
You're
your
not
term,
bound.
if your license term has run out, then the rights are yours from the next day. But you have to read one thing in that clause. There will be a clause which often says to be automatically renewed unless specifically communicated by the author.
No, I think mine doesn't have. Okay, so if it's not there, then it is.
Because that is something that often is something that conflicts with the author's interest. From the publisher's point of view, I'll tell you why it's there. Precisely because a publisher may not have a system which flags up that last day of 5 years, and all these contracts are kept manually. If no one alerts them to this, if people have changed, it's very hard. Today I've signed on the book, 5 years from now, suddenly rights have expired and I don't know, the next day my rights are over. So most publishers will say to be automatically renewed for a further 5 years unless communicated or mutually agreed. So just check that.
So if that automatic is not there, then it's
yours.
Okay.
I would still say as a courtesy write and let them know.
Okay.
Not because publishers want to cheat you, because publishers are not, they don't have the systems so right in place that they will, want willingly.
Okay. Another clause is in their contract, which says that after the period of the contract, the term of the contract, rights would revert to the author, especially if after the author asks the publisher, are you interested in reprinting? And we say no, then you are free to take
like the first refusal is always again.
No, it just basically says within so many days, if you've written and the publisher has said no.
If you have asked me to reprint that book, but I don't do it within 6 months, the rights for you to offer it to any other publisher will automatically.
Okay, that's all we have. Just make sure as an author that there is a termination clause in your contract. There have been contracts written without any termination clauses.
That means even after the term expires, you can't.
Because there is no termination clause, there is no such clause which says after so much time it will expire or whatever. Just make sure it's there.
Okay, that's all we have time for. And before we break for chai, the next session is it's a masterclass, the second masterclass on production, book production. So please come back at 4:30, and we'll go on until 6:30, right? 6:30. Yeah. So it's a 2-hour masterclass. So please have your tea and take a break, and I'll see you back here. Thanks. Kartika, we have to get the beautiful Kumbi Kapoor.